Asset protection is not to avoid paying taxes. So again, please don't call saying that you want, asset protection and not pay taxes. And it has to be done before you're being sued.
Welcome back to the Massive Passive Cash Flow Podcast. I'm Gary Wilson, your host. I'm so glad to have you back listening, or what you're watching in that case, to the show. We got a great guest today, Brian Bradley, all the way from the beautiful West Coast, near Portland, Oregon. So if you've never been there, guys, I'm telling you, it's awesome. A little bit further east, you've got a Hood, Mount Hood and the Clackamas River. You can raft. To the west, you've got the coast. It's just an amazing place. So, in any case, Brian, welcome aboard, man. I appreciate you taking your time to share with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Gary, for having me on. It's going to be a lot of fun. And we have a lot of important things that I'm going to try to quickly go over and myth bust a lot of misconceptions about the fancy word of asset protection.
Yeah, you got it. Well, let's dive in. So, everybody listening, that's what today's about: asset protection, playing defense. Remember, we play offense, we play defense. This you have to pay attention to. If you keep driving, but don't try to take notes. We'll have a listen to show notes, but definitely pay attention because this is how you keep a lot of what we teach you how to make. So, Brian, go ahead and start us off at the beginning. I mean, what was the trigger that got you into this part of the business? I mean, I'm gathering you were doing something else beforehand, and something led you to this. If you don't mind sharing how that started, it'd be great.
Absolutely. Sure. I got into asset protection actually from the litigation and trial side of law. I was one of the top trial lawyers in the nation, and I just got tired of seeing clients, having frivolous lawsuits filed against them and just losing things that they were working so hard to get and not really being prepared for that. And especially if you're like investing in real estate or you're an entrepreneur creating businesses, it's just a matter of time. The more you increase your assets and your visibility, you're increasing it's a law of probability, right? Like you're increasing the chance of you getting sued. And the thing that people don't realize is like we got to set up our protection and defensive systems before we're down that rabbit hole. Otherwise, they don't work. And we're not
Yeah.
taught these things in law school. We're not taught them on the bar exam. Not many law firms do this area of law. So most are like business attorneys or contract attorneys. And so you get a lot of misconceptions, or we're listening to, investment shows like this, and then you get salesmen and not attorneys going onto these shows talking to people and telling them what they should do. And there's a lot of misconceptions, which actually brought me into why I wrote my number one best-selling book, Overexposed. I had so many clients calling in and be like, man, Brian, I'm just so confused on what to do. And I went to like this workshop or I listened to this show and I'm hearing, 20 different ways to skin a cat. What do we do? And so I
Mhm.
was looking around and I realized, man, there's so much misconceptions and it makes sense why people are confused. So I ended up writing, my book on the world of asset protection is kind of the only horn book of all the different layers like LLCs and pros and cons of that and how we layer up the whole system. And
Right.
that's how I got into it. And when I started looking, around the landscape, and I just realized how messed up of a world that we're living in, where it's so litigious. And if we don't
Oh
take the
yeah.
steps before, and I can break that, like why it's so important beforehand, if you want in a minute, but that's how I got into this, and it combined the passion of litigation and law and investing and taxes all into one area of practice where I like to geek out on all of them.
Yeah. Hey, you mentioned book, and I apologize for asking that in the beginning. What's the name of the book?
Yeah, it's called Overexposed. And it's going to break
Okay.
down everything that we talk about today in a lot of detail in a very easy format to read. And I use a lot of case law and stories and examples to just prove the point through actual law. And that way people
Yeah.
can use that as a reference to where when they're shopping around for this, they actually have more education and they know when they're getting, run around.
Yeah. I tell you what, I really appreciate this. I mean, this subject is near and dear to my heart, and from personal experience, and I really want everybody to pay attention. So, why don't we go ahead and start unwrapping this? I'm sure typically when people come to you, Brian, they've already got, I call it the dead cat syndrome. They got this dead cat, like, huh, can you
Yeah.
can you get this thing alive again? So take us to that point, and then tell us, what could that person have done way differently if they'd have come to you a year before, or maybe 10 years before?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's a great way to start. Like, one, like, what is asset protection? And then, like, how do we go about this is kind of what it is. And so, asset protection is simply placing a legal barrier between you and your assets and the person that's actually trying to sue you to take it before it's needed, right? Like big bold words before, right? That's it.
Right.
It's just a barrier, like a safe for your gold or your guns or valuables, like anything of value you want to put behind that legal barrier and out of your personal name so that's not easily attached with a lien or reached. And so it's not hiding money or moving assets to not pay or avoid paying taxes. So if you're calling me being like, "Hey Brian, I want to create an asset protection plan because I don't want to pay taxes," like, that's illegal, right? And it's not going to work. You're taxed on your worldwide income if you're a US resident. And it's not estate planning. So like your revocable living trust is not going to protect you because they're not designed to. And so we can talk about that a little bit later when we break down the world of trust. But the two big takeaways from the beginning are that asset protection is not to avoid paying taxes. So again, please don't call saying that you want, asset protection and not pay taxes. And it has to be done before you're being sued. And I talk
Right.
about the timing of creating an asset protection plan, and fraud in my book a lot because these are the actual critical elements and the stages for an asset protection plan to even work or be effective. And it's demonstrated really well in a 2010 case called SEC versus Solo. And
Hmm.
here's a situation where Miss Solo, the wife, her trust was attacked by the SEC to collect her husband's fines from engaging in fraudulent trading schemes. So essentially, just like a bad man doing bad things, and they're the
Right.
villains in the story. And so the court found that the husband made a fraudulent transfer after the SEC judgment was entered against him. So what he did was he signed assets over to his wife's trust, to protect the assets after the judgment. And this is just no bueno. Like this is just straight up fraud. Now, Mr. Stola was
Right.
held in contempt of court, but, and this is a really big but here, 100% of his assets were protected. And so I always talk about this case to demonstrate two things. One is the power of an offshore trust, which we'll talk about, later in the world of trust. But even though Mr. Stola was blatantly wrong, his assets were safe. The SEC couldn't get to them. And so that just goes to the power of using the right type of trust and specifically like offshore trust if they're ever needed. But what
Yeah.
sucks here, is that he was actually held in contempt of court. But why? What did he actually do wrong? The second point, which is really critical, is that this case also goes to the timing of setting up your asset protection plans. He transferred the assets too late. He was late to the game. He was already in the rabbit hole. He did this after the
Right.
fact, after the lawsuit, and then even worse off after the judgment. And so this is just straight up fraud. And that opened the door up for the court to hold him in civil contempt of court. So again, the big takeaway is that the planning has to be set up before the lawsuit, not after the fact.
Yeah. Yeah. If I remember correctly, they call that fraudulent conveyance. Like you're in trouble and you're purposely trying to shield things from what would rightfully be attached in the suit. Whether
Correct.
rightfully or
So if
wrong
you
is
did it
that's a different story.
beforehand, before it was
Yeah.
foreseeable, then we're good to go. And so that goes
Yep.
like set up your defenses before your castle is being attacked.
Right. Exactly. And in business, I mean, it's just inevitable. And I'm telling you, I've built seven businesses, had five real estate holding companies, and I was either pure as the driven snow for years. And then after I started selling and merging my businesses, two suits came up from one of the something my two of my agents had done different transactions. It really didn't involve me other than I was the owner of the company. It didn't matter. The law. I was the broker owner. I got dragged in along with every uncle and aunt and cousin, was around. And
Yeah.
I had to pony up for a settlement. And I was totally, really, quite frankly, excuse my French, pissed off about it. I'm like, I can't believe this. And that's when my attorney said, look, you're pretty well structured, but you're not infallible. He said, you need to trust. This is
Yeah.
20 years ago, but
Well, and that goes to
um,
like the big conception, kind of like where I break down, like, all right, like you are like a classic example of like, I have my LLC or business corp. I'm good to go and insurance. And then you realize it's not good enough because people miss in LLCs, right? Like first word, first letter, limited. And they don't realize
yeah,
like LLCs weren't created for actually asset protection. They were created to avoid double taxation. And so
yeah,
this really comes down into jurisdictional shopping. Like, where do we go to create these LLCs up? And you always hear about like Delaware, Wyoming, Nevada. But that's not really going to be that effective. So again, like LLCs, they offer limited veils of protection, right? That veil is going to be is better than nothing. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, that's the
Right.
starting point. Base layer foundation 101. Then what do we do from there, right? But that veil that we're talking about, it's fragile. And like you learned in your own situation, it can be pierced. So I always say, think of a veil for asset protection, like that thin, flimsy piece of fabric that goes over the face of a bride on her wedding day, right? It's there, but
Yep.
it's not really protecting you from much. And so
Right.
there's a great Supreme Court case that came out in 2023 on this. It's called Mallory versus Norfolk. And this is a
Okay.
really important case, and it goes to actually like crushing jurisdictional shopping. And so here the Supreme Court upheld a Pennsylvania statute that, here's the quote, so like forces companies to face litigation within the borders that it's registered to do business in. And so state courts are permitted to exercise jurisdiction over registered foreign corporations. So think about your like Wyoming LLCs that you're trying to use as holding companies, right? That's what the people investing in real estate do. And so these states are now able to have jurisdiction over those Wyoming, or Delaware corporations. So you can't just go and take Wyoming or Delaware tort and damage and personal injury laws with you to other states when you're getting sued. And there's a big
Right.
distinction. And the problem is like people aren't realizing there's a difference between business law and tort law. So like if Gary and I were to be like, hey, let's go create a company to go sell widgets nationally. Yeah, let's register in like Wyoming or Delaware, Nevada, one of those good states, because it's going to have more effect on our operating agreements for quotes here like internal disputes and affairs of the business, like something falling apart. We want our operating agreements to have credence. But if we're getting sued from like real estate, generally it's a personal injury, like a tort liability. That's not an internal dispute and affair of the company. So there is actually no veil protection there whatsoever. And so people need to
Yep.
stop
Yep.
confusing business law with tort and liability law, because tort and liability law is very state specific.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I know this is a huge subject. There's probably no way we can cover it all in a podcast. So we may have to have you back again, probably. But what I would like to do is, since we mentioned trust, um, if we could give an example of that, you mentioned offshore, and I know there's probably, I mean, just of all the trust I've learned of, there's at least a dozen
Yeah.
different kinds of trust.
Oh,
But what would be a good step for somebody that has like a dental practice, and now they got
yeah.
10 different real estate, you know, properties that
Great. Yeah,
they're
great
renting
example.
out, and
Yeah.
just it's not,
Yeah. So
yeah.
probably like the largest portfolio of our clients are either pure real estate investors or that kind of
Mhm.
high risk, high visibility professional like dentists or
Yeah. Yeah.
doctors, CPAs who then are investing also in real estate. And generally what we do is we want to separate out risky assets like the real estate into LLCs, but we use the
Yeah.
state that the asset is at. So if it's a like California property, it goes into California LLC. If you're in the Smoky Mountains
Okay.
in Tennessee, it's a Tennessee LLC. And then it layers up, right? Then those LLCs will be owned and managed by a management company. We generally use limited partnerships. And then you want that management company to be owned by an asset protection trust. And then we can either save like breaking down the world of trust for a whole nother episode if you want, or I can just like give a quick distinction on what the trusts are like, and then we can maybe pick it up at another time. So just let me know how you want to go about that.
Yeah. Well, the asset protection trust, I think that was one of the first ones I set up, and I can't remember what state it was. Nevada, Wyoming, like you said, one
Yeah.
of those. Um, but it was essentially like a living trust, and then listed all my assets. Did all that paper. It was a lot. It was huge document. Named my kids as beneficiaries, and I've had it ever since. I never done anything else with it. I mean, there's other things we. Well, let me ask you this. Here's one I've seen people approach me with, and I've looked into it. I just don't know anything about it, and I don't know anybody that's used it. It's using IRS. I think it's IRS code 643. It's complicated. It's like a non-grantor, spendthrift,
Yeah.
complex, irrevocable trust. And
Yeah.
I couldn't even begin to tell you beyond that all the other words in
Yeah.
it. And it sounds expensive for what
Yeah.
they.
So
You
yeah, so I might be kind of like we're like for the higher level stuff like we do, we use what's called a hybrid trust, which is taking a foreign trust, like the famous Cook Island Trust, and then through the IRS, we domesticate it through IRS code section 7703. And what it is a
Okay.
self-settled spendthrift grantors trust. And that's the creme de la creme, the best level of protection that you can get because we're literally taking the statutory non-recognition power of the foreign Cook Island Trust. And then instead of paying all the upfront costs and management fees of it, we can not
Yeah.
have to comply with the IRS compliance because we're domesticating it in the US. And so it's not a cheap
Gotcha.
trust, like it's an investment. So you're generally talking about 30,000 to set up, but you're not
Yeah.
paying the like for the IRS disclosures and FACTA disclosures and 1035, 1035As. So you're combining like a hybrid car, the best of both worlds, like the strength of the offshore, the tax simplicity of the domestic. And the reason you do this is because most people offshore purely is way overkill and expensive. You're talking about like 50 grand to set up, 10 to 12 a year to manage it. But then the domestic
Yeah.
ones actually don't work. And they're limited in states that recognize them, and even in those states, they're just getting pierced through. So, but they have
Yeah.
tax simplicity. So if we combine the two together, like a hybrid car, you have a better product. And that's what that
Right.
hybrid trust that you're kind of like, trying to hint around is. It's just building a better product. And that's what the asset protection trust should be. Whether you're there or not, those are generally for people who have, multiple properties, maybe investing in different states. You're a doctor, a high,
Yep.
visible profession, and your exposed net worth is about $1 million or more. And that's where
Yeah.
that profile kind of fits in.
Did you know that you can participate in class every Monday? We call it Monday Night Live, 7 p.m. Eastern, with me and dozens of other investor agents from around the country, in fact, the world. Every Monday, totally free. No selling, no recruiting, just straight up education on anything and everything in real estate. And we have a lot of good guests coming on once or twice a month, bringing in expertise on subjects like how to buy a house with crypto. Okay. How about them apples? What about AI? How's AI affecting our business? How about the metaverse, blockchain processing? We're already using it in title work. So come on to Monday Night Live. Be ready to take notes and ask questions because it's live and engaging, and you get to participate by asking questions and meeting others. So we'll see you there. Go to GaryRealEstateWithGaryWilson.com. Click on the resource tab, drop down, and you'll see Monday Night Live. And in there, you can see one of the most recent classes. But more importantly, you can register for class as many as you want going up to like the end of the year, I believe. So in any case, do that. We'll see you on Monday Night Live. Look forward to meeting you in person. Take care. Gotcha. Well, when it comes to offshore accounts, the Cook Island Trust, is that part of that whole genre? The
Yeah,
offshore, is it?
so it is. It's the gold standard of anything offshore because all they do is asset protection and they don't even like waggle a toe in tax stuff because you don't want to be red flagged like, the Caymans and Belize and all of them. And whenever you go
Yeah.
to the other ones, like those ones, they're just called generally like the cheap man's version of the Cook Islands. But they're
Yeah.
used more for tax havens, which then you get in trouble for. And then you always have to create a backdoor exit to the Cook Islands anyways. So since we're not doing
Yeah.
anything for taxes on this, like we're just doing it for asset protection, we're not getting red flagged. And I'd rather just use
Right.
Cook Islands because it's the best. And then
Yeah.
I always fall in the line of we want full disclosure. We work within your CPA. Let your CPA take you to the max line that you want for your tax stuff, but we got to protect the assets and lock it down in case. Because if you lose all of your assets in a lawsuit, what magic can your CPA do for you if you don't own anything anymore?
Exactly. Yep. That's exactly right. Asset protection. It literally is. It's, you're protecting your quarterback. It's what you're doing.
Good. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well,
so,
and what
all
I
right.
find is it actually frees you up to make more educated risks without being afraid of the lawsuit because now you know you're protected and we know
Right.
money has to move, right? If we're investors. So now we can find more deals and take more risk that we're comfortable with knowing like, okay, hey, if this deal blows up or this partnership blows up or something happens here, I at least now have the protection in there. So it takes that burden and fear of not doing something or pulling the trigger because you're afraid of a lawsuit off the table and allows you to move money faster.
Yeah. Well, all right. This is getting really good. I know, there's like, we're just scratching the surface of, like, well, you went to school to study for this stuff for long, long, long years. But, what I want to shift over into life insurance because a lot of people are confused by that too. I mean, I've had people tell me, why in the world would I ever have life insurance? And I'm like, well, I can give you some examples from some clients I have and what I've done myself, but it's gotten so much more sophisticated. I started back in the 80s, and now that the stuff you can do with life insurance, and it's just fun, like index universal
Yeah,
life and
absolutely.
you can have an annuity component to it. But how does that fit in with that with this whole subject? You know?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So like I also have my insurance license, and then for a while I never did anything with it. And I kept talking to clients and seeing like, man, there's a lot of gaps in their coverage, and I'm protecting their assets from lawsuits, but then there's also financial protection. And I realized as their attorneys, I'm kind of like, if you've watched like basketball, I'm kind of like the point guard. Like I have all these connections and I just wasn't utilizing all of my tools. So I added financial protection to my practice, utilizing, like you were saying, like these insurance products. And I actually use them for myself and my kids, which is amazing safe way of generating wealth. And what people don't realize is kind of like what's the difference between like term and whole life insurance, right? And so when we're talking about life insurance, I think this is like kind of the best place to start is just like what's the difference between term and permanent? And then that naturally drifts into index, all right? And so if we're just starting at the beginning, term life insurance is what its name is. Like it's there for a fixed duration of time. So let's say like 10 years.
Okay.
You pay your premiums, and at the end of the term, his coverage is over. And you don't generate any cash value built up in it, so it's not really generating any wealth for you, and you can't benefit or use term life insurance while you're actually alive. So it's just there for a catastrophic event, for a specific period of time. And this actually happened to me out of law school. I got, first job, and I got term life insurance through the state bar. And then I paid into it, and then the term ended, and all my premium payments like were gone. So how did I really benefit from that? Like I didn't. And
Yeah.
so whole life insurance and index life insurance, which we can break down even more, like, or we can geek out on that in even another episode because that's a big topic,
Yeah.
is they're types of permanent life insurance. So they're different from term insurance in that they don't end after a specified duration of time, and then they generate cash value within the policy that then you can actually access and use while you're living to help accelerate your wealth and use it for like various needs for like buying rental properties, or let's say you have an economic hardship and need to pull money off of it, or we can create them for our kids for financial head start plans called like $1 million baby plans, which I have for my, I have a 6 and 7 year old daughter, so I created those each one for them. And so, you know within the world of permanent life insurance, you have big key differences between whole and index. So, for example, with whole life insurance, you pay fixed premiums for the life of the policy. So the cash value of that policy grows at a fixed predetermined rate that's going to be set by the insurance agency. But that keyword is fixed, right? Like it doesn't change. So let's say, for
Hmm.
example, your premium set at $1,000 a month, and you're paying $1,000 a month, so $12,000 a year for the entire duration. If you miss some of the payments, and you miss that grace period, your policy is going to lapse. Now let's compare that to index, right? Like you just mentioned, like IULs. IULs offer more flexibility in premium payments, and I like things that are flexible. And so the payments can be adjusted within certain ranges, and the cash value then in that IUL is going to be linked to the performance of the stock market. So, as the cash value grows, your potential for growth is going to be based off of the index's performance. So you can get more growth out of it, like 13% or more. So, and then the magic thing about that is like it sets a floor or a cap at zero. And so you can capture the growth without the downside loss because they set the floor at zero. So whole versus index, it really just comes down to like, do you want the cash value up front? Or do you want the growth for later on when you're older? And that's how I distinguish the two. And so when I talk to clients, it's like, hey, what is the purpose that you're looking at it for? If you're looking like, hey, I want to generate some quick cash value, just go with whole. If you're looking at it as like I do, I'm using this to subsidize my retirement later on and pull off the money and probably get like a long-term rider on that for my, medical needs when I'm older, then go with an IUL.
Okay. All right. Um, Now I have to ask this question because this has come up before. A lot of people that we work with in real estate, they have regular W-2 jobs, they have 401ks, or they
Yeah.
have their own business and they set up a solo 401k or I think
Mhm.
it's called a Roth 401k.
Yeah.
But I've seen situations where they can take the 401k, and I don't know if it's a transfer or somehow it morphs into an annuity, or they take part of it and
Yeah.
goes into an annuity, and it's a totally different strategy. But I've never, now I'm considering because I like the idea of it, But how does that work?
Oh yeah. No, those are And so you're talking about like 401k rollovers and annuities, which are they're beautiful. And
Okay.
what we they're called like protected retirement planning. And like I said, like I kind of geek out
Mhm.
over on these. It's an indexed annuity. And I actually think, this is generally the starting point for people's financial planning when they actually call in. This is kind of like the first place that we go because a lot of people have different 401ks from different companies, right? And then you move one company, go to another, and then what do? We have like different IRAs that we set up when we're young. So we want to roll those over eventually, especially as we get over. Now, annuities, they're not for everyone. Like I wouldn't be talking to someone in their 20s or 30s about them. Annuities and rollovers are for people like 40 years or older, and you generally have a lump sum of money that, you're looking for future income guarantees. We're looking at like future money down the line when we're older and we need it. Now sometimes
Mhm.
I get asked like, which is better, Brian, like a 401k or annuity, and what's the difference? So when we think about annuities, most of the time we think about like the commercials on TV, right? And like old people, but that's not what they're about. Rollovers into annuities are very common. And what an annuity does is it offers a guaranteed payment of money for as long as you're living through it's called a process called annuitization. It's like a really fancy financial word. That means it's just converting an investment that compounds and grows into then periodic payments for your entire life. And this is really important to you
Okay.
because what it means is that you don't run out of money when we're older. Because a lot of people are planning for retirement, right? We're like 65, 67 years old. I'm retiring. What's post-retirement going to look like when you're 75, 80, 90? Where's the money going to come into? So this is what it starts doing, like rollovers into annuities start doing. So with 401ks, it
Okay.
can only give you as much money as you deposit into it, along with that like investment earnings that it's made. And they're going to be subject to the market. So just think about how many times when the market's crashing in like the recent past, and we're just sitting there like pulling out our hair, right? And if the market goes down, we get like a 20% loss in the market. That can take 5 years or more to recover from. So that just keeps adding to our retirement time frame. So think of it
Mhm.
like this. A 401k is like a container that's designed to hold money and help force you to save for retirement. Whereas an annuity is designed to actually create income. And annuities historically outperform 401ks. And now they're both going to be part of your financial planning. They're just going to work at different times and stages of your financial planning and different times and stages of your life. And then the two of them actually can work
Mhm.
together over time, right? So we start with the 401k to force you to save by withdrawing from funds from your paycheck. It's going to be tax deferred now. And then eventually when we're older, like in our mid 40s, 50s, we roll it over into like a 10-year annuity later on to then generate and create more future guaranteed post-retirement income that's also tax deferred.
Yeah. Is there a now some people have I guess their opinion is annuities. They're great because it's like the greatest guarantee you can get as far as income is you're going to get a specific amount. I mean, there's all kinds of annuities, of course. They can vary. There's variable rate annuities, fixed rate annuities. But um, I guess the big uh, challenge is people say, well, when I'm gone, that annuity goes away too. Like nothing to go to my children. But I'm pretty sure I've worked with clients that had annuities that that survived them. I don't know
Yeah,
if
yeah.
I'm
I mean,
mixing
yeah,
up my apples and oranges here, but
yeah, and a lot of it's going to be tend to like the annuity and the company that you're with, and then like what are you putting them into like trust and stuff like that. But like that's your money, that's your work for money, so it's going to be inheritable.
okay, good, yeah. And so as far as an estate plan, like I mean, I'm 61. I'd never even considered annuities till like last year, and
Yeah,
just happened to be talking to somebody at a conference, and they were saying, "No, this was a big part of my estate plans." I was asking more questions, and so I started looking into it myself, and I can see how it could definitely play a part. But what would you tell other people listening? Like, how does it fit in with an estate plan? I mean, somebody that's a candidate for this type of product. You know, how does that? Is it like 10%, 20%? Is it? You mentioned the time frame. It's something that plays a role after you've accumulated funds in a 401k. So if you could
yeah,
unwrap that a little bit more, like as far as a big estate, let's say somebody's got real estate, owns
yeah.
businesses, and they've got 401k from their wife's job or something, Mhm.
Yeah. And so the way it all kind of goes and gets put together is like we're looking at the real estate, right? We create the asset protection plan. Get them out of your personal name, put them into like the LLCs, get the management company and the trust. Okay, what's the financial protection? Like, one, do you also have an estate plan? Like, do you have your beneficiaries in place, your medical directives, financial directives? All right. What type of financial insurance do we have? God forbid, like if you're a business owner, like I love in like life insurance for businesses because there's so many things that we can do with like key employees. God forbid one dies or leaves. We got to be able to think about our businesses and self-retirement plans, especially if we're self-employed. But from there, we're looking at what's the gap of insurance. Like generally, if you're employed and you have some sort of life insurance through your own company, it's generally going to only be about to 100,000, and then your mortgage is probably going to be around 400,000. So we got a gap, right? And so we got to fill that gap,
Yeah,
and then from
yeah,
there. The issue is, all right, how do we want to fill that gap? Do we want to generate cash value? What do we want to do with the cash? What are you investing in? What's the plan from post-retirement? How are we going to pay for like one of the biggest wealth destroyers, not death taxes. That's like really old school. It's divorces, out of control legal costs, out of control medical costs, right? So then we got to look at not when we're old or like 70 and saying, I need to get long-term care riders to pay for medical costs. You're not going to get it then. We got to look at it when we're healthy in like our 40s and early 50s to get this stuff done. So these are the plans
right,
that like how we structure it. And then at certain ages, like maybe we're 45 and we're sitting on, 200,000 in our 401k. Well, let's take half and roll it into an annuity for 10 years. Then when we get another 100k, all right, now let's do another one. And so we incrementally stage it out over time. That way we're building multiple, forms of continuous life income, monthly income until the day we die
right.
in different stages.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, we cover an awful lot.
No, no, we did.
This
Yeah.
has been awesome. Yeah, I definitely love to have you back on the show. But um, uh, any final thoughts, words of wisdom, and then also the book Overexposed. I mean,
Yeah.
you have a website people can go to. If you can fill us in there, that'd be great.
Yeah, you can jump on my website, www.btblegal.com. And I use my website as an educational resource for people for like asset protection planning, estate planning. And that way we start building up the knowledge base. You can email me, Brian, at btblegal.com. I do free consultations. Generally, my advice for people is you got to think about this stuff before you need it. We can't kick the can down the road if we own assets and businesses because if you call me when you're being sued, it's too late. I have to exempt the lawsuit, right? And if you
Yeah,
don't get your estate plan in place, and God forbid you in a car accident, like, oh, I'm only 40, I don't need one. There's so many reasons why if we have a family, we own something, we need an estate plan. When we're adulting, that's just part of like, aging and adulting is what happens if we get in a car accident and we're unconscious. We can't run off to court for every single time and drain our assets fighting
yeah,
in court. So we need medical directives. We need the financial directives. If we have kids, like we need to know who's going to take care of our kids if we're not around right then, right? Then we get older, same
right,
same issues there.
right,
So we got to just adult and getting the asset protection, the estate planning in place, and then we got to think about not just retirement, but post-retirement, which no one really talks about. They think retirement is I'm 67, I'm done working, and I'm going to just survive. And they don't think about the big key word, inflation, right? And like
right.
whatever you saved is not going to last that long, right? Maybe 10 years, but you may have
Yeah,
another 15 years after that. So that's where these,
yeah,
annuities and these IULs and stuff really come into play is we need to look not just in the rearview mirror like now or 5 years. We got to look at 15 years and then start planning for our medical expenses, so we don't drain our estate we work so hard for.
right,
So my
right.
word of advice, just start
Yeah,
planning this stuff now and we take little bites of the apple of what's the most pertinent thing. And then over a couple of years, we have the whole plan in place.
yeah. Well, definitely wise for advice. I appreciate that. And by the way, I did one of my very first jobs was in banking, and it was in the um, retirement division. So I had a manual. It basically was like I forget the chart. It was in the big accounting book, and it was like an actuarial table. But what it showed was it was a chart, like an Excel spreadsheet that showed across the top number of years that you have to invest. And along the side was, what you would invest. And then in the middle, of course, were your results. So the key thing is over time you could watch the power of compounding.
Mhm.
And I remember with this guy I worked with, he was getting ready to retire, and he said, "Yeah, let me tell you, man, you got to have $1 million to retire these days." And I thought, well, I'm going to go plug this in, see what stuff costs now. And granted, this is Virginia Beach, so
Yeah.
my beautiful brand new beach home, a mile from the water, I could walk to it from the ocean, cost a whopping $85,000. Now, guess what that house costs now? You know,
Oh,
probably 650,000. But the point is, I just did the math on cars and houses and boats, and then I looked at the chart and I thought, I've got to have $10 million. And here we
yeah.
are. And I was exactly right. I thought to have the lifestyle, you got to have $10 million. That's like I mean, well, it depends on your expectations of your
Yeah.
retirement years. But the thing is, and I don't want to freak people out and scare them. If you haven't started yet, don't worry about what you did or didn't do in the past. Start with what you can do right now. And I would definitely get the book, um, Overexposed, right?
Yeah.
From Brian Bradley. Get that. Go to www.btb, right? I guess to tease your middle initial .com, BTB.
Yep.
And then or an email you. It's Brian Guys, BRIAN at btb.com. The biggest thing I got out of the day, guys, and I hope you did too, is, man, you have to prepare. This is just like business, sports, relationships, military. You have to prepare, and don't take anything for granted. Don't put it off. This is not something you want to kick down the can down the street. Prepare now so you're protected, because you don't know when something's going to happen, how big it's going to be, but you live long enough, something's going to happen. Why not be prepared for it? So, in any case, I appreciate you listening, watching. If that's the case, Brian, I appreciate you giving us the golden nuggets today. We'll definitely have you back on. And for everybody, God bless you and your loved ones, and we will see you on the next Massive Passive Cash Flow podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Massive Passive Cash Flow. Be sure to go to realestatewithgarywilson.com to join our community and start building wealth today.